Welcome to the Knowledgebase Ninja Podcast, where 𝐊𝐞𝐲 of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Good day, everyone. Our guest today is Patrick Martin, Senior Director of Technical Support at Coveo. Welcome, Patrick, to the Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing good. Yourself?
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking your time and participating in this podcast. So, Patrick, please help me understand a little bit more about your role, or how did you get into documentation as part of your role, and then we can just deep dive into other questions.
Yeah, sure. What I do at Coveo, I'm basically responsible for the technical support team. So my team basically handles all of the incoming requests, questions, issues coming from our customers. So every time we get a new case that comes in, it's very important for us to leverage other people's knowledge and documentation. So a lot of our practices are based on knowledge-centric services, so KCS. So it's really at the center of everything that we do, and we use our own technology, Coveo, to fuel that. Since we have an experienced search engine, intelligent search engine.
Super. That's really interesting to know, Patrick. So what's the documentation process at Coveo? I think before that, just can I ask you this question? So how is a technical support role and the documentation role come together for you?
It's very closely entwined. Even though we have different types of documents. I mean, the documentation team is really focused on documenting feature functionality and product related documents. So if a new feature functionality comes out, a new product comes out, the documentation team will make sure that everything is well documented so that our customers can know how to configure it and what the feature is all about. From a technical support perspective, we go one step further, which means the documentation that we create is more towards you're having this issue or you're having this situation, this error message, here's how to fix it. So they're very complementary, even though they're very different. And how the whole process is really handled in support is we really integrate it as part of our case management workflow. So as our support agents are managing their cases, there are different fields in our CRM that they need to keep up to date, like, description of the problem, what the root cause is, and what the solution is. So when they get to the closure of the case, these fields carry over to our knowledge management platform, and they're auto-populated. So it makes it easy for the agent to create that knowledge article and publish it once the case is resolved and closed.
Fantastic. So you might have answered my next question, but if possible, if you can elaborate a little bit more on your documentation process and which teams do you normally involve apart from your team?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, there's so many different teams that are involved in this whole knowledge management strategy and documentation. It's not just about support. Definitely, we are probably the biggest contributors because of the volume of cases that we get and the number of interactions that we have with our customers. But we also have our customer success team and our professional services team who are contributing to building documentation to basically help our customers self-serve. Because from a technical support perspective, that's really what your end goal
Very
is when you're investing so much into documentation, is to make sure that customers have access to this information and they can resolve issues on their own. And what your team is focusing on is resolving things that we've never seen. So that is really where where we put a lot of effort into our process and making it a collaboration across multiple teams. What we also do is we on a regular basis, we look at the areas of the product that we have the most cases on, and we do a root cause analysis. So we basically do a deep dive into these cases, and we come up with recommendations that we share with our development team to improve the product, improve the customer experience. We also share some recommendations with our product documentation team so that we can improve our product documentation and make it more detailed for customers and make sure that they have the necessary information that they need at the tip of their fingers.
Fantastic. That's really good to know, Patrick, because as you rightly said, I would like to again echo what you said. Having a proper documentation is key to technical support or customer support, right? So that's really nice to hear. So how do you manage your documentation workflow?
It's pretty much embedded within our case management, at least the creation piece. But we also have another workflow that is for all of the quality reviews, the publishing process, and that is basically handled by a smaller group of knowledge domain experts within support. So what we try to do is we try to give publishing rights to all the team. That's what we want to do. We want to make sure that the content is published just in time. So it's created, it's published. But before we give publishing rights to everybody, we need to make sure that they have reached a certain amount of a certain quality level and that it's consistent. So as part of KCS, there's the notion of AQI, which is Article Quality Index. So our knowledge domain experts are going to review a certain sample of documents that are created and knowledge articles. They're going to rate them based on very set criteria. And once a support agent has maintained, 95% AQI consistently, they are now being promoted to publisher, which means they can create and publish their article right away. And we continue sampling, articles here and there to make sure that the quality level is maintained and so on and so forth. If we see that people are struggling, our KDEs are going to, do coaching sessions. So we have a KCS coaching process to make sure that, the quality of the documentation in the articles is consistent across the team, because we do have about, between 25 and 30 people in the team creating content. So they're all different individuals. They all have their own flavor and their own approach, but we want to make sure that everything is consistent so that the customer experience doesn't vary based on who created the document.
Fantastic. That's really great to hear. So, working as part of a creative team, how do you think it can improve documentation? Or I will add one more flavor to this question, if you allow me, please. So what are the different creative techniques you use to improve your documentation, Patrick?
I don't know if it's creative or if it's just the fact that we have, as a technical support team, we have so much insight into what's going on with our customers, whether it's how they're using the product, how they want to use the product, their comprehension of what the product should do. So all of that information is basically a gold mine that we can use to improve, whether it's documentation, the product UI, the product functionality. So we basically use that information to our advantage and feed it within the organization to make sure that product documentation is improved, our customer training is improved, our knowledge articles are improved. So I don't think that it's necessarily taking the creative approach, but it's more about using a data-driven approach where if we see that we're getting a spike of cases on a certain feature functionality because it's not well documented, it's not well understood, then we can definitely feed that back into the organization and say we need to improve this area of the documentation because customers are clearly not understanding. And sometimes it's very simple things like, we have in our documentation, sometimes we have code samples.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just not well identified. So customers just copy pasted the code sample thinking that it would work, but it wouldn't because it was missing information. And it's just that it wasn't clear in the documentation that this was a sample and that they shouldn't copy paste it. Sometimes it's simple things like that. And when you're creating the document, you're not thinking about it. But when the customer starts using your documentation, that's when you start seeing, how it's really being used and how it's really being understood.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well said, Patrick. So the real validation comes when the customer does from step 1 to 10 and gets the required result.
Yeah, definitely.
Super. So in terms of important factors to consider, what would you comment on that when creating documentation?
Oh, well, I think that's a very good question. And at least, from a support perspective, it's trying to keep it simple, not overdoing it and making sure it's embedded in your workflow. If you're trying to recreate what you've already documented within your case, chances are your adoption is going to be very low because, you're doubling the effort. Versus if it's simple, if it's integrated, if the work that's already being done carries over into your document, then you're going to get a much higher adoption rate from your team to create documentation because it's easy and you're not duplicating effort. And the other thing is always thinking about the what's in it for them, right? So in support, sometimes the documentation aspect is probably the least favorite task that people have to do. But if you're able to get the buy-in from everybody and really position it to say, if you're documenting this, you're not just helping your customers, you're also helping your peers, because a lot of the documentation that we do is never published externally. Because it has internal information, we're using internal troubleshooting tools. So it's also helping your peers in troubleshooting similar issues that come along, for the next one. So it's more about not just thinking about, oh man, I need to do a document and it's a pain. It's more about thinking of the impacts downstream that will change your work and your peers' work and make it much easier in the future, as well as eliminating the recurring, tickets that you don't want to deal with because they're not challenging enough. So there's a lot of advantages to doing that in a support environment because you're really changing the game, and then you're starting to flip that new versus known ratio where your known issues get deflected, they get answered through self-service, and your team is getting things they've never seen before, and it keeps them engaged because the work remains challenging. So you're not just resetting passwords or telling people to reboot their routers all the time. That's all taken care by your self-service.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think reduction in the repeated questions or repeated tickets from the customer is one of a good metric to measure against quality documentation, right?
Yeah, I mean, definitely case deflection is a KPI that most support organizations are gonna keep track of. But now things seem to be evolving more towards self-service success, because documentation doesn't just stop at knowledge articles and things that you're publishing. With the coming of communities, now a lot of support organizations are starting to get involved in communities. Customers are starting to help themselves in communities. So you're not the only one creating product documentation anymore. Your customers are actually contributing to building, documents, even though it could be in forum threads and things like that, but it still remains information that is valuable and that becomes available for all your other customers to consume, even though you're not the one building it. So now it becomes kind of an ecosystem between, the supplier, the partner, and the customers that interact within this online community. And you can use that information to feed your documentation, to improve your documentation, or even just make it public so that other people can consume that. So you're kind of in today's world, you're kind of losing somewhat control, but it's also exciting to see that you're building this community and this ecosystem around your technology. So that's pretty exciting.
Fantastic. So apart from the cases deflation or a reduction in cases, have you noticed any other kind of reduction in your workload since introducing quality documentation?
Not the workload per se. It's been pretty stable. What we're seeing though is, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is the flip into the type of issues that we're getting. We're starting to see we started heavily investing in knowledge management about 2 years ago, and about 6 to 9 months ago we started to see our new versus known ratio start to flip. So before we had maybe 70% of our case volume was known and 30 was new. We're now in the 40 range of new and 60 known. So we're really starting to see that flip, and we're going to be changing our case submission flow and make it more of a guided resolution, so that we can be more efficient on how documents are being presented to the customer so that they can consume it. Because right now it's kind of a panel. On the right-hand side, you have the documents that are being suggested. On the left-hand side, you have the fields that people need to fill in. So they could just fill in the fields, never look at documentation, submit a case. Versus now we're going to take a multi-page approach, where the first page will be, okay, we're going to gather the information that we need to know about, what your issue is, what product is it about. Second page will be, hey, these are the documents that could help you. And the third page, if they get there, will be the fields that we need to prioritize the case accordingly and route it to the right people. So having the documents presented to you on a page is kind of nudging the behavior a little bit around, hey, you might, they're more in your face than if they're just on the right-hand side and you don't notice them that much. So we're expecting to see that new versus known ratio flip even more and get more of new cases and more challenging cases come our way, instead of having to troubleshoot the same cases over and over again. And the impact that has on your support metrics is you're going to start to see your resolution time go up, because the number of issues that you're getting are unknown to you. So they're going to take more time to resolve. So you need to make sure that your executives are aware of that, because everything is intertwined. So you're going to see your resolution time go up. You're probably going to see your first contact or your first year resolution metrics go down, and that's expected. And that's what we really want to go to. So when you tie all these four together, case deflection, new versus known ratio, time to resolve, and first contact or first year resolution, they tell a story. So if you look at them all separately, you might get mixed up and not necessarily understand what's going on. But when you tie them all together, you get a full picture of the impacts of your knowledge management and documentation efforts.
Fantastic. That's really nice to hear, Patrick. One thing I wanted to understand is a little bit more about your reporting structure. So how do you report on your documentation, and also who do you report? If you can help me understand, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to get lost in metrics and start to measure, a lot of stuff. So we kind of take a twofold approach. One of them is focusing on the outcomes. So that's really where we want to put our focus is measure the actual results that we're getting through documentation efforts and publishing knowledge articles and really investing in knowledge management. So as I mentioned, are the impacts on our time to resolve, on our first year resolution, on our new employee ramp up time, and things like that, because this is really what is, what the outcome is. If you're just focusing on the activities per se, you might lose sight of, are you actually getting any value out of it? Then we really focus, the second fold is really focusing on the activities. So, just keeping a close eye on, how much articles are we creating and publishing externally versus internally. What's our just-in-time publishing? We want to keep it under 2 days to make sure that we're getting the content out there as quickly as possible. We also look at, of course, our AQI. We look at, how our knowledge domain experts are reviewing, how many articles they're reviewing. Are they reviewing and publishing them within a certain amount of time? So we're really splitting our reporting into the outcomes and the operational / activities that we want to make sure that are happening so that we have them on our radar.
Fantastic. So you did mention that your documentation is not publicly available, correct? It's only to your customers through a secured login access, I'm guessing.
No, the community is wide open.
Okay.
So it's fully public. You can access it without a problem on our portal.
Oh, so super. So in that case, do you know if you're generating any organic search traffic from your knowledge base?
Definitely everything is indexed in Google. So, anybody can have access to it. And that's part of our strategy, because we have different offerings of our products. So someone can take a free trial and, play around with it. And for them to be successful, they need to have access to the documentation. So you can easily find the documentation you're looking for through Google, or you can go directly to our community, on which the technology, because Coveo is, and we say it's an experience intelligent engine, but it's intelligent search that is running on artificial intelligence. So once you hit our portal, you're now using, if you're searching, you're now using our technology, you're now using Coveo. And what we do with that is really driving relevance and personalization of content. So, the things that you're consuming in our portal, we're able to tie that to, other people or personas that have been looking for the same type of content, and we can personalize the experience. So it's basically doing what, the Amazons and the Wayfarers are doing for you, but we are able to do it, on our portal, and that's what we offer our customers as well.
Fantastic. Great. So I think we are good to move to the rapid fire round question, Patrick. All okay?
Yeah, sure.
Super. So who have you learned the most about documentation from in your career?
Oh, wow. That's a good one, but I have to say that probably all the KCS stuff, at least from a product support perspective, is definitely where I learned the most, from the value of creating content and publishing it.
Super. So can you share a documentation related resource you have consumed recently?
That's a good one. I'll have to revert back to, the consortium of KCS. That's really where we get our information and our inspiration to continue driving our knowledge management initiative.
Okay, super. So what is the one piece of documentation related advice you would give to your 20-year-old self?
Don't rely on your head too much. You can't remember everything. When I started in support back then, I wasn't even thinking of documentation. Knowledge management was not a thing back then. But definitely as time grew, we kind of started shifting our mindset and seeing the value of it. And definitely, I mean, the internet changed a lot of things and making this available. Before it was more of a PDFs and putting documentation on CDs and sending that over to your customers, versus now everything is available at the tip of the finger. But definitely, don't think your brain can remember everything. Create documentation and create reference documentation, because it's going to help at some point in time.
Understand. Yeah, that's true to to some extent.
Yes.
Super.
Yeah.
So, Patrick, I think we are almost to the end of this podcast, but I would like to ask you if to share anything that we missed to cover as part of these questions. You'd like to add to the audience?
Nothing really comes to mind right now. I think we covered a lot of ground, and then hopefully the audience is going to find this helpful.
Super. Thank you so much, Patrick. I know it's really early morning for you, and I really appreciate all the points you shared. And I was very eager to learn from you because you come from the technical support background as well, and getting hugely involved in documentation. So I wanted to get your flavor of how documentation helps your customers. So I think I was able to thoroughly enjoy this podcast, and I hope you have the same feeling too.
Yes, definitely. Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
Thank you, Patrick. Have a lovely day and stay safe.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.